It's widely thought that the move will probably come sometime this year, though the very weak growth figures released while the Fed's policy committee was meeting make an early move somewhat less likely. That earlier news showed that business investment and exports had fallen in the first 3 months of the year. Nonetheless, the Fed statement said it expects the economy to continue to expand at what it called a moderate pace.
Jean Nidetch, the founder of the international dieting company Weight Watchers, has died at her home in Florida. She was 91. Jean Nidetch turned worrying about one's weight into a $1 million industry. Using calorie counting, meetings and sharing stories, she encouraged her members to be responsible, take exercise and eat lots of fish. BBC News.
You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Tim Franks, and this is NewsHour. And coming up on our live programme, we'll be hearing about the logic of the criminal.
If what you pay is only $450, you get on a small boat. If you pay better, you get on a better boat.
We meet the gangs making millions from migrants desperate to make the deadly crossing to Europe. That's in about 30 minutes' time. Just over a year ago, the news from the Central African Republic was bad, of a poor and poorly governed country in the grip of sectarian violence. Today came news of a twist to that story, a twist not just worrying, but potentially sickening. It's that French prosecutors are investigating allegations that French soldiers said to be part of a peacekeeping mission in the CAR engaged in the sexual abuse of children, some as young as 8. The original allegations were contained in an internal UN report which hasn't been published but has been seen by Paul Donovan, who's co-director of the NGO AIDS Free World.
This is actually a series of 6 interviews documented by UN staff, 6 interviews with young boys ranging in age from 8 to 15, all recounting cases where they were in desperate need of food and they approached soldiers asking whether or not they could bake some food, and they were told that they could get food and a little bit of cash in some cases in exchange for sexual favors, basically performing oral sex on the soldiers, and in one case sodomy.
And these were French soldiers?
They were almost exclusively French soldiers. It appears that there may have been one soldier from Equatorial Guinea, although it's not quite clear what his participation was.
Who did the interviews with these children?
One staff member from the UN Commission for Human Rights and one staff member from UNICEF.
And can you just clear up the timings on this as well? When were these allegations first made?
The interviews were taken from May 5th through June 24th, so it's a series of 6 interviews that span that 6 or 7 week period.
The reason I'm asking you about the timings is because, as you'll be aware, the story has moved on, not just from the horrific nature of the allegations in the first place, but also to being a bit of a storm within the United Nations, because the official who passed this information on to the French authorities from this internal report in the United Nations said that he did so, apparently, because he was frustrated with inaction by the United Nations. And yet, what we're hearing from the French authorities is that they got this information in July. If you're saying that the last allegation was made on the 24th of June, it sounds as if this UN official didn't wait very long before passing it on to the French authorities.
Certainly the dates would testify to that. I don't have any idea. I have not spoken to the staff member in question, and if, like me, having worked in the United Nations, he's aware of the general slowness of the process, I can only speculate that might have been his concern. I don't know. I do know that he would have known in his position that this set of interviews with all the names of the victims who were interviewed and the descriptions of the accused and the times and places and so forth of the incidents would have to end up in the hands of the French prosecutors, because the French government is the only entity with the right to pursue legal proceedings against the French troops when they're operating, overseas.
Can I ask you what your reaction to not just the allegations, but what has happened since these allegations have been made, the fact that the UN has suspended this official, what your feelings are about all this?
I am finding it very difficult to become as incensed about the individual staff person and his treatment at the hands of the UN than I am about what this handling of the entire issue says about the United Nations management or tolerance for sexual exploitation and abuse throughout the peacekeeping operations that are increasingly demanded in difficult hotspots around the world. I'm just appalled that, on the face of it, in any case, that someone from the United Nations was aware on May 5th that a child had been forced to perform sexual acts on an armed person who was there to protect him and the civilian population living in an internally displaced persons camp. That has to be the most vulnerable person you can define. A child, many of them were without their parents, many of them separated from their families. They had all just been through a terrible, terrible armed conflict, and this child was subjected to this sort of abuse, and that the focus of attention on a senior international civil servant in the UN system seems so preposterously misplaced to me. I would think that the UN and absolutely everyone who works for the UN, and there are many, many who are honorable and there for noble reasons, and then there are many who are there just covering up anything that will redound to the disfavor of the United Nations. I would think that everyone else in the UN system, and just people all over the world, would be most disgusted by the fact that sexual exploitation and abuse is so rampant, and that there is this tolerance for it, despite the protestations of the Secretary General and the UN, that there is zero tolerance throughout the system. When you see things handled in this, it's not just ham-handed, but it's actually, it appears to be some sort of a cover-up by people in New York at the highest levels because of the political sensitivity of a series of cases like this against a member state.
I mean, this case is, if these allegations stack up, gut-wrenching in themselves, but it comes a month after the leak of another internal report that suggests that sexual exploitation and abuse in peacekeeping missions is, as you say, rampant, endemic, and I think in the words of this internal report, the most significant risk to those missions.
That's right, and it's quite telling. My organization, AIDS Free World, also leaked that expert team report to the media, and it's telling then that we were the recipient almost immediately of this Central African Republic report. It seems as though there are people who are desperate to just release information that is so damning and so detrimental to humankind, and that they're under a gag order to keep to themselves. And as soon as they find that there is an organization like AIDS Free World that will expose it to the media, and that the media will act as the conscience of the United Nations, then this information starts to flood in. And there's just something so wrong about that the United Nations does not have a system that allows the population it's meant to serve to feel safe enough, not only to be living under their protection, but also to report and to feel as though justice can be served.
Paula Donovan. Farhan Haq is Deputy Spokesman for the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. He was listening to that interview and gave me his response.
First, I wanted to correct something that Paula Donovan said, and apparently said repeatedly in the interview that you just were broadcasting, which was that these were allegations concerning UN peacekeepers. That's false. They're not.
Okay.
They were French soldiers under the command of a French force on the ground called Sangaris. At that point, in the spring of 2014, there was no UN peacekeeping mission
Indeed.
on the ground, and France did not join the UN peacekeeping mission afterwards.
Indeed, although
they've always been a separate entity.
But they supported the UN peacekeeping mission. We can talk more broadly about other allegations, historic allegations. But can I ask you specifically about?
But my basic point is that this is a case where the UN, in the form of our Human Rights Office and of UNICEF, tried to collect information about allegations having to do with these French forces, and we've turned over information to the French forces so that they can follow up, and we've been told that they are in fact following up, and will take on this case. And,
why has the aid worker who provided this information been suspended?
Regarding that, yes, one staff member was placed on administrative leave with full pay while there's an investigation going on into how that staff member handled evidence. Essentially, by that staff member's own admission, that staff member provided an unedited version of a report that included the identities of victims, witnesses, and investigators, and provided it to the French authorities in late July of last year.
What's the problem with
Now, the problem is, for us, we follow a series of procedures where whenever the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights puts out these reports, they have a standing rule that requires the redaction of any information that could endanger the safety of victims, of witnesses, or of investigators. I understand the need to provide these documents, but there is a process that we go by, and we have to abide by that to make sure that innocent people are not placed in harm's way. I'm not trying to say that anyone has necessarily done wrong. That remains to be determined, how things were handled. But what we're trying to do is just make sure that our evidence is handled properly so no one is placed at risk.
Except you could be placing people at risk by acting so slowly. That seems to be the crux of this, is that the wheels of the UN bureaucracy turn so slowly that presumably we've yet to see what the fruits of this internal investigation are, and we're talking about what at that stage was continuing abuse of people in the most vulnerable, kids in the most vulnerable position.
Yes, and we're horrified by that as well, which is why we, the UN, were the ones actually looking into this. Part of the point is, I know it's frustrating, the process, but the process exists partly to make sure that the people who come forward with the information do not face harm. And that's also important, just as important as making sure that their grievances are actually addressed. And I did hear the earlier part of this discussion, where you talked with Paula Donovan, and I believe you and she herself acknowledged that these charges came out well into late June 2014, and the report was shared in its unedited form in mid-July.
Well, that may have been motivated by concern about the welfare of the children.
That chronology, yes, but we are all very concerned about that, and we were actually persisting in following up, and we have been providing information to the French, and we have been trying to make sure that this investigation will be pursued, which apparently the French authorities have informed us that it will be.
Would you also just very briefly concur that, although you were keen to say that these were not UN peacekeepers, that there has been a historical problem of child sex abuse among peacekeeping missions?
That is a problem, and it's a problem we need to address. Although this one is about a separate force, the Sangaris force, which is under French command and control, and is not part of the United Nations operations.
Okay.
Having said that, regardless of who did it, it's a serious problem. We don't want innocent children in a war situation to be taken advantage of in this way, and it needs to be determined, it needs to be investigated, and if there's been wrongdoing, it needs to be prosecuted.
Farhan, the Deputy Spokesman for the UN Secretary General, speaking to me from New York. This is NewsHour.
Support comes from Orchestra Iowa, presenting Russian Masters with world-renowned violinist Brian Lewis, performing Tchaikovsky May 1st in Iowa City and May 2nd at the Cedar Rapids Paramount Theater at orchestraiowa.org. Support comes from Design Ranch, featuring furniture, lighting, and gifts to celebrate life's occasions and every day, created by international companies including Herman Miller, Floss, and Alessi, on the corner of Davenport and Dodge Streets in Iowa City.
Each night, Studio One brings you classic tracks and the best new music, indie rock, singer-songwriters, R&B, local artists, and more. I'm Mark Simic.
And I'm Tony Daner. This week we have new music from Alabama Shakes,
Delta Spill, and Calexico, plus classic tracks from The Strokes. Our featured release this week is What For?, the new album from Toro y Moi. Don't miss your daily soundtrack beginning at 7 p.m. 7 nights a week on Iowa Public Radio Studio One.
You're with the BBC World Service. The programme is News Hour. It's coming to you live with me, Tim Franks. 5 days on, and the aid effort in Nepal is today beginning to reach some of the more remote regions of the country. It's also an operation which is drawing increasingly strident criticism within Nepal at its slow pace. When the Prime Minister Sushil Koirala paid a visit to earthquake survivors and medical staff at a military hospital in the capital Kathmandu, an angry crowd gave vent to their frustration. Sounds of anguish among those who survived. There is, though, still hope that more may yet be found, as Unita LeMay reports from the site of one 4-story building which collapsed in Saturday's earthquake.
Inside there was a software company, an internet cafe, and a photo lab, and dozens of people when it came crashing down. Machines have been trying to dig through the rubble, hunting for survivors.
Here, all of the people waiting here are still waiting for news of their loved ones. About 10 people are still missing inside there. आप यहाँ पे किसको ढूंढ रहे हैं?
He tells me his 22-year-old son was in the building. He feels helpless and has been waiting here day and night, hoping that his son will be found alive. There have been some miraculous escapes. 27-year-old Rishi Kanal was pulled out of the debris after being trapped for more than 80 hours.
I had some hope, but by yesterday I'd given up. My nails went white and my lips cracked. I'd lost all hope since yesterday, and I was sure no one was coming for me. I was certain I was going to die.
Nepal is on war footing, its Prime Minister said. He's been visiting the crash sites in Kathmandu, and both he and his men have appealed for support.
We are working from the early morning to the evening, continuously, incessantly. So what we expect is we need more international community support. That's all.
Help did arrive here an hour later, a French rescue team. But Nepal needs many more as it runs out of time to save its people.
Unita LeMay in Kathmandu, along with those in the capital waiting for help, there's a large number who are deciding they have no option but to leave. This report from the BBC's Sanjoy Majumdar.
This is the main bus station in Kathmandu. It's called Gangabu. And from here you can take a bus to go to virtually any part of this country, and even to India across the border. And there are hordes of people here, all crowded around. There are a number of buses as well. And they're all extremely packed. There are people inside, but also many on the roofs. And there are others trying to force their way in, even though there is absolutely no space left.
I'm going to my hometown. I have been waiting for a bus since the morning, but there are no tickets, and no one is giving us any information. There's so much confusion. I don't know what to do.
I am going Java.